The Nike Vomero 17. While it's never been the most exciting shoe, it has been a very dependable volume trainer until it wasn't. And once it wasn't, then there was a big problem. I got this shoe in the closing weeks of my build for the New York City Marathon last fall. It came in the last 3 to 4 weeks of that build, right when my legs really needed a high volume, more cushioned trainer option to the Pegasus, just to kind of eat up those longer, easy runs that I needed to keep doing. Now, I had been doing most of the build, rotating 2 pairs of Pegasus, which was doing just fine, but this shoe was a welcome addition. It definitely was something that I enjoyed, the 2 layers of foam, the more traditional geometry, but because of the cushion below the Zoom X, this shoe does encourage you to roll forward. It was a nice mix of traditional geometry with some of the modern rolling feel that rocker shoes have. And I enjoyed it. My initial impressions video was quite positive. I did compare this to a Pegasus 40. I still favored the Pegasus 40 because I find that just a much more versatile shoe, but this was a good shoe. Got back to Taiwan and I spent a lot of the end of November, all of December and January just sort of rotating this shoe with a bunch of other shoes that you've seen on this channel, mostly max stack, rockered, max cushion shoes. So this actually was working out as my sort of more minimal shoe during that time. And it's not a minimal shoe, but compared to some of the other stuff I was running in, this is a much more minimal shoe. And it did the job. The first 50 miles or so in this shoe, it was fine. Like I said in the intro, this was never the most exciting shoe. It was never the shoe that I would pick first to run in. It was never a shoe I was excited to go out in. If I opened my little shoe cabinet and looked at, I'm going to go run in this shoe today, generally I would pick another pair of shoes, look at that pair of shoes and be like, I've been running in this shoe too much, put them back, and then I picked the Vomero. It just wasn't at the top of my list, but every time I went out in it, it just felt really good. Until about 75 miles, and that's where things really started to change. After 75 miles, I noticed I was starting to get some pain in the outside of my ankle and the top of my foot, right in this region, after I ran in this shoe. After the first run, I didn't really think much of it, rotated some other shoes in, pain completely went away. The next run that I did in this shoe, it was back. Okay, that's strange. Put it back, rotated a few other shoes, went away. Came back for a third run in the shoe, it was back, and it was even more than the last 2 times. Then I started to really look at this shoe and think about, okay, what is causing this? Because I don't get this in any other shoe that I'm currently running in. And I'm running in a lot of very soft, squishy shoes, not the typical shoes that I always run in. After that third run where I was getting the pain in my ankle and the top of my foot, I really looked at the shoe and realized something quite important that I had overlooked before. If you look at the medial side of this shoe, you'll see that the sidewall of the midsole really flares outward. And especially the cushion layer of foam, which is the harder layer of foam under the Zoom X, also flares out quite a bit. So this shoe from a medial or a pronation side really has a lot of stability. And you can see that when I'm trying to roll my foot inward. Now on the lateral side, you can see that flare in the heel. You can also see that in the cushion layer of foam. But if you look into the forefoot, you see that that flare is now gone. If anything, it scoops inward. And it scoops inward in quite an extreme way, right in this area, which is where, as a forefoot striker, I'm landing. I'm landing in this area. So what was actually happening was when I'm landing, this shoe was somewhat rolling outward. Now, I had noticed that over the previous 70, 80 miles, but I only ever noticed it on a very heavily cambered road. There's a single road that I run on that has a very extreme camber on it because it's a drainage area. And I always noticed my foot that was on the lower end of that camber always felt like it was sliding down the camber. I thought that was just the extreme camber in the road. I didn't connect it to what's going on here with the removal of the flare in the forefoot of the shoe. But once I looked at this footage, and this was footage I shot of just doing B-roll for this video, And when I shot this, I was actually doing this before I was going to go out for another run in the shoe to really kind of think through the forefoot problems. I noticed how much the Zoom X foam is basically over-rolling the Cushlan foam in that area where the Cushlan foam is really scooped out and it scoops back in on the rail of the shoe. As soon as I saw that, I understood what the problem was, and I realized I'm never going to run in this shoe again. So when I saw that footage, immediately I went back in the house, changed my shoes, went out for my run in a different pair of shoes because I knew I'm not going to run in this shoe again because I clearly understood that problem. This soft Zoom X foam on top of this firmer Cushlan 3.0 foam, Zoom X foam tends to soften up around 75 miles. Fresh out of the box, Zoom X foam is really bouncy and really resilient, but it does soften up around that 75-mile mark. And I have a lot of experience running in Zoom X foam. I'm very, very familiar with that feeling. And it was the same feeling I was getting here. So that's why I think I didn't notice this until the Zoom X foam really lost some of the structure that it had here in the sidewall and the rail of the shoe, that when I'm landing right here, it's kind of spilling over, and that's causing a little roll. It never felt like it was rolling over, not in an extreme way, especially on flat, smooth pavement, but obviously it was. That was what was causing the pain in my ankle and the top of my foot. That is a huge deal breaker on this shoe. I got curious and I took a look at the Pegasus 40. Now, on the medial side of the shoe, I noticed the sidewall of the midsole flares out, both in the forefoot and the heel. On the rail of the shoe, again, the rail right where the midsole hits the outsole right on the edge of the shoe, it does scoop in a little bit, but not as extreme as it does on the Vomero. On the lateral side, I noticed the flare in the heel, just like the Vomero. And then in the forefoot, I did notice that it does flatten out, though there is still a flare in the foam, and it does scoop in a little bit right here in the forefoot and in the midfoot. But I have literally run 1,500 to 1,600 miles in multiple pairs of Peg 40s and Peg 39s, which have the same midsole. And I have never once had any pain in my ankle or the top of my foot. I've never felt like this shoe wants to roll outward. It's never once given me problems. And I think that's a couple things. There's a lower volume of foam in this shoe. There is still a flare here of foam coming out, which is not really present in the Vomero. And React foam, which is what the midsole foam is in the Nike Pegasus, is considerably firmer, much denser. So it does support the foot. You don't have the two layers of a very squishy foam in Zoom X on top of a very rigid or firm foam of Cushlan 3.0 where it can spill over that. This is just one foam. It just works. It's just a solid shoe. And I never have that problem on here. If we see a Vomero 18, which if we see it this year, probably will just be a upper update, same midsole, same outsole. So it probably will be a shoe that I won't even bother with. But the Vomero has always had a very strange update schedule as well. So who knows if we're going to see an 18 this year, next year, or at all. But I'm not really that heartbroken about this because I still prefer the Pegasus. I said this in my comparison between the Peg and the Vomero. I just prefer this shoe. Yes, I liked the Vomero as a shoe that encouraged me to run slower, but I can do that in the Pegasus. I've done that a lot in the Pegasus. I can handle it in the Pegasus. But I find the Pegasus to be a more versatile, more dynamic, much more fun ride that isn't hurting my ankle or my foot. And that's a big win. So I'm going to stick with the Pegasus. I will definitely be covering the Peg 41 this year. I'm excited about what I'm seeing in the Peg 41. I have a couple concerns, but we'll get to that once we know more about the Peg 41. But for now, I'm saying goodbye to the Vomero and I'm sticking with the Pegasus. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you find this content useful, consider subscribing. You'll see more content from me pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.